Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskrityam Naram Chevam Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayet. Nashta Prayeshu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavati Sevaya Bhagavate Uttama Shlokir Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki. So, reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, third canto, third chapter, verse 23. The chapter again is entitled The Lord's Pastimes Out of Vrindavan. So, we will read the Sanskrit of this verse. Devadhineshu kameshu devadhina swayam pumam ko vishrambheta yogena yogeshwaram anuvrata. Devadhineshu kameshu devadhina swayam puman ko vishrambheta yogena yogeshwaram anuvrata. Devadhineshu kameshu devadhina swayam pumam ko vishrambheta yogena yogeshwaram anuvrata. Translation. Every living entity is controlled by a supernatural force, and thus his sense enjoyment is also under the control of that supernatural force. No one, therefore, can put his faith in Lord Krishna's transcendental sense activities, but one who has become a devotee of the Lord by rendering devotional service. Om Jnana Tirimahannasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Juta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatham Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahita Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitamscha. He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostite Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priya Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhayeva cha Patitanam Pavinebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshnaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharini Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatpadeshatari Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki Jai Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. So that translation again, read by His Divine Grace, Srila Bhai Sharanarvindam Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Every living entity is controlled by a supernatural force, and thus his sense enjoyment is also under the control of that supernatural force. No one, therefore, can put his faith in Lord Krishna's transcendental sense activities, but one who has become a devotee of the Lord by rendering devotional service. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. As stated in the Bhagavad Gita, no one can understand the transcendental birth and activities of the Lord. The same fact is herein corroborated. No one but one who is enlightened by the devotional service of the Lord can understand the difference between the Lord's activities and those of others who are controlled by the supernatural force. Excuse me. The sense enjoyment of all animals, men, and demigods within the purview of the material universe is controlled by the supernatural force called the Prakriti or Devi Maya. Please excuse me, I'm just putting my phone on silent. So I think this is important, this very first part of the purport. And actually, this is an incredibly subtle and yet somewhat under-emphasized part of our philosophy and just realization about dealing with this world generally, right? Srila Prabhupada is saying in the second sentence, no one but one who is enlightened by the devotional service of the Lord can understand the difference between the Lord's activities and those of others who are controlled by the supernatural force. So this is incredibly important because in all of our dealings, there is a Vedic aphorism called Atmavan Manyate Jagat. Atmavan Manyate Jagat. And what this effectively means is that I interpret other people's behavior according to the way that I see the world, according to my vision, according to the prism that I see the world in, right? So if I am a very foolish individual, let's say somebody is holding a knife, and I am a foolish individual, maybe I'm prone to criminality and murder, and somebody is there with a knife, my instinct may be, oh, that person is about to kill someone. If I am a surgeon and I see somebody wielding a sharp instrument, I may think, oh, he's going to heal someone. And therefore, the way in which we see the world is often, if we're not conscious, is a projection of our own consciousness. So in understanding the Lord's activities, we may take our own activity as a reference point on which to understand the Lord's activity. Now, in the previous verses, obviously, the Lord having 16,108 wives and being with them simultaneously, and the nature of his engagement with those wives has come into focus. This is in Dwarka. So many mundane people will look at Krishna's activities and see it as an extension or a reflection of their own desire to enjoy this material nature. And often you hear people say, Krishna had so many wives, he had so many girlfriends in Vrindavan, therefore I can have many amorous partners and I can also enjoy with the opposite sex to my heart's content. Because we effectively are projecting our own perception of the world onto Krishna. But what Srila Prabhupada is saying is that only by seeing the Lord through the salve of devotional service, only by elevating your consciousness to a proper degree can we understand the Lord's activities in truth. So we must be very, and in fact, many of our disagreements, whether it be with other devotees or whether it be with other people generally in life, is because we look at the world exclusively through our prism. You know, if there is a mountain of gold or a gold mine, somebody who is a laborer may look at that and just see that, oh, that's going to be a lot of hard work. Somebody who is a businessman may think this is a tremendous opportunity for me to fill my bank account. One who is in the service of the nation may feel, wow, we can have these resources to really glorify our nation. And one who is in the Brahminical state of mind may think, wow, look at the variegatedness of the Lord's energy. So, or look at the way, and even Chaitanya Mahaprabhu used to look at gold and he would say, look at that yellow stool. So he may look at it and actually have, you know, a negative connotation about gold. And you can see how in that situation, if we are just stuck in our way of looking at the world, not realizing that there are multiple perspectives, we can have a conflict. Can you imagine a conversation where a businessman is excited about the prospect of gold, whereas a Brahminical renunciate sees the entangling nature of gold and how that conversation could come about. One may say, this is just entanglement. And the other one says, well, this is going to feed my family. And this is a great opportunity and a great business opportunity that's given to me. And you can see how a conflict could come in, not realizing that there is an element of truth in all of them. But they can, and therefore we can see that just as there are different varnas, there are different perspectives. But the only thing that can thread all of those perspectives and make them complete is if we understand that all of those perspectives have to be engaged in Krishna's service. So whether in looking at the Lord's activity or whether in evaluating others' activity, we have to understand that simply relying on our own inclinations is not enough to properly understand the Lord. If we use our own mundane instincts, we can have a mundane interpretation of the Lord's activities. And Srila Prabhupada is saying, be very cautious not to do this, not to see the Lord through your own prism. And, you know, if people can say, well, you're saying you have a perspective, and that's just, you know, that's just a philosophical trick. You're saying the Lord operates according to a different value system, and the Lord is different. But that's just your opinion. And my opinion is that human nature is human nature. And anyone that appears in this world will behave according to the laws of human nature or animal nature. But Srila Prabhupada would often counter this. And they may say that, you know, there's no such thing as a divine perspective. And Srila Prabhupada would often counter this kind of argument. And he would say, okay, you may say that you cannot see God. And you may also never have met somebody who has genuinely seen God. But that does not mean that God does not exist, nor does that mean that the person who has seen God does not exist. Because until somebody has, Prabhupada would say, scrutinizingly question every single person on this planet, 8 billion. Who in this world has spoken to every 8 billion people, met every single of the 8 billion inhabitants of this planet? No one. They may have met 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, a million, 10 million, 8 million. It's still a fractional amount, not even 1% of the world's population. And what's more, they have not met all people for all time. How many countless billions of people are now no longer on the planet? So Srila Prabhupada can say, you may not have seen God, and you may not have seen the person who has seen God, but that does not mean that God does not exist. Nor does that mean that the person who has seen God does not exist. It simply means that you have seen neither. You have seen neither. So neither should we become dependent on our own limited senses, nor should we become influenced by the opinion of others until they can show their credentials. What is the credential of the Amala Puran, the Srimad Bhagavatam? Well, we've already stated that in the beginning. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Nashta Prayasho Bhadresho Nityam Bhagavati Sevaya Bhagavati Uttamashloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki. That it will, by reading it, destroy the obstacles to devotional service to practically nil. So follow the process and see. Actually, by reading the Bhagavatam, the Lord will become present within you. And by reading the Bhagavatam, you will be able to perceive the Lord, not only in your heart as Paramatma, but also face to face as Shakshatari. Just follow the process. Do not become deviated by this materialistic perspective, which depends on what? One's limited experience. How many great thinkers have not only compiled this Bhagavatam, but have guaranteed that by exploring this Bhagavatam properly, you will have that darshan of the Supreme Lord in your heart and as a person. So the first part of this purport is really emphasizing that about our perspective. You see, the second part of the purport I think that we should focus on is, we'll carry on and we'll pick it up. The sense enjoyment of all animals, men, and demigods within the purview of the material universe is controlled by the supernatural force called the Prakriti, or Daivi Maya. No one is independent in obtaining sense enjoyment, and everyone in this material world is after sense enjoyment. Persons who are themselves under the control of supernatural power, i.e. Prakriti or Devi Maya, cannot believe that Lord Krishna is not under any control beyond himself in the matter of sense enjoyment. They cannot understand that his senses are transcendental. In the Brahma Samhita, the Lord's senses are described as omnipotent, i.e., with any sense, he can perform the activities of the other senses. Okay, so let's first of all talk about this supernatural power, about Maya, about Prakriti. So, as those of you read, and I would encourage everyone to, and I'm sure you have, but if you haven't as yet, to read this book by Rupa Goswami called Upadesh Amrita, the nectar of Upadesh, which means instruction. Upa means to be close to the spiritual master. So Upadesh is the instruction that you receive from being close to this spiritual master. And Amrit means the nectar. So the nectar of the instructions that you get from being close to the spiritual master. In the same way, Upanishad is also the information that you get by being close to the spiritual master. Gita Upanishad is another name for Bhagavad Gita. We also know Sri Isha Upanishad. Sri Ishopanishad is another Upanishad. There's many Upanishads. So in the nectar of instruction in the second verse, it's in the purport actually, Srila Prabhupada gives a very useful explanation of the different energies of the Lord. So we've got here this supernatural power, which we refer to as Prakriti or Devi Maya. This Prakriti or Devi Maya can be classified as the external energy of the Lord. You then have the internal energy of the Lord, which is coming from the Supreme Lord, Sri Krishna himself. And then you have the marginal energy, Tatashta Shakti. So internal or spiritual energy is known as Antaranga Shakti. Antaranga, inside. People who speak Hindi may have heard the word andar. Andar means inside. So a good way to understand Antaranga is the energy that is within the Lord. The Lord is made of this his pure internal energy. The Lord then expands into multiple jivas, Tatashta Shakti. And then the Lord also has his Maya Shakti, the expansion, which creates Maya. Maya literally means that which is not. And that Maya is also designated into two, that Bahiranga Shakti or Maya Shakti or external energy actually has two different qualities. There is a Maya which allows you to come close to the Lord, which is known as Yoga Maya. This Yoga Maya makes you forget the Lord, but it forgets the Lord so you can become closer to him for service. You see, if you are always conscious that the Lord is the supreme personality of Godhead, you may be too afraid to even put a garland on him. You may be too afraid to even offer prasadam to him. But you see in Vrindavan, out of love, sometimes the cowherd boys take a bite of their own sweet and then place the remnants. They say, wow, this is so nice. Let me share this with Krishna. And they put their own remnants into the Lord's mouth. Without Yoga Maya, no one is going to eat something off a plate and then hand that to the deity. So Yoga Maya, you forget that the Lord is the Lord. You just realize you want to share and please him. And so this Maya makes you forget the Lord, but so you can serve. And this is the Maya which is going on in Goloka Vrindavan and in the spiritual realm. Now, the other form of Maya is Mahamaya. And this form of Maya makes you forget the Lord so you can be away from him. And actually, this can be very dangerous for the conditioned living entity, because you will forget the Lord and start to think that your enjoyment comes separate from the Lord. And that, for all of the living entities in the material world, this is the Maya that they operate under. They think that there is some other, they forget the Lord so they can get about their own business. You know, they forget the Lord. Yoga Maya will make you take a sweet and offer it to the Lord. Mahamaya will make you take a sweet and think, I'm keeping all the sweets to myself. Why will I offer any to the deities when I can gobble them all to myself? Why will I offer them to the temple and they'll be shared about and I might only get one sweet? Let me just make the sweets and I will enjoy. So this is the sense enjoying. This is the enjoying mentality. This Mahamaya is very dangerous. And actually, Srila Prabhupada, when he's talking about Prakriti, the material nature, he's talking about this Mahamaya. And this sense enjoyment mentality, you can see how the consciousness of the living entity becomes corrupted and he becomes the center of his enjoyment. The Lord is no longer the center of enjoyment. His agenda is the center of enjoyment. Now, when deluded by this Mahamaya, and then when looking at the Lord's activity through his Mahamaya, he will think, the Lord is just an enjoyer like me. He does certain things, I do certain things, and they're the same. And rather than seeing the Lord as the perfect, ideal epitome, and we are just like a cheap Chinese knockoff. The Lord is the original enjoyer, and we are just the small, fragmental, copy. We start to see ourselves as the ideal and project our own mindset onto the Lord. Well, it makes sense. I like to go out and enjoy with people, and the Lord likes to go out and enjoy with people. So he must be doing pretty much what I'm doing. You see, there's a subtle difference there. Rather, the Lord being a reference point and we being a tiny reflection of him, we consider ourselves a reflection point and project our propensity onto the activities of the Lord. So it's very important to distinguish between these two. And this is why we've talked about the internal, the marginal, and the external energy. And a good reference, which I often give, is that of a beach and the ocean. If you've ever been to a wide beach, you're in Kenya, so maybe, what can I say, Diani Beach, or where's the place on the coast, Mombasa, maybe there is a nice beach. I think Diani Beach is the nicest beach in Kenya, if I'm not mistaken. There's a beautiful beach in Nungwi, in the northern part of Zanzibar, of Unguja, the Isle of Unguja. It's the big island. And you'll see that there is a beautiful wide beach. And that beach is always sandy and warm. But the water is also very shallow because the beach gradually submerges beneath the water. And when the tide is out, the beach is even double the width. It's massive, massive. I mean, maybe 100 meters from the tree line to the water. And then when the tide is in, maybe it's about 50 meters. And then, of course, there's a part, of the ocean which is always submerged. Even when the tide is out, that is still the water. So that 50 meters of the beach, which is always beach, beautiful white powdery sand, that is like the internal energy of the Lord. That is the Lord himself. The Lord is always the Lord. He is always Atmaram. He is always the Ishvara Paramam. It's not like the living entity, which is sometimes Brahma and sometimes a cockroach, right? The Lord is always Ishvara Paramam. He may take the form of a boy, or he may take the form of a boar, or he may take the form of a lion, or he may take the form of, we don't even know. Bhagavatam even says in the second canto that there's unlimited forms the Lord may take of his own sweet and free will, which we will never even know about at any given time. He may be, flying around as a bee because that's his will. But he's always the Lord. He is always the Lord, absolutely. And he is always in completely control of his surroundings. If the Lord wants to sprout wings and fly off into the sky, he can do so. Now, we, on the other hand, we have some ability to lord it over. I can pick up my phone, I can put my phone down, I can clap my hands, I can put my hands up. I cannot manifest, and this is all based on my karma, but I cannot manifest wings. I cannot go back in time and become Nava Yovanam, a young 20-something-year-old. I can't manifest a floating palace in the sky, just like Kardama Muni did for Devahuti. I cannot change my context. The Lord can change his context. The Lord can make a planet, and he can make the sky, the ground, the sky. He can do everything. I have some control, but it's infinite within the context that I find myself in. I'm not the creator of my context. I may have curated some karma, but I have not produced the laws of gravity and the laws of evaporation. I'm a tiny amount of control within a context that I have been placed, within a creation that has been created by a force far bigger than me. And that is the fundamental difference between the Antaranga Shakti, which is the decisive source of everything, and the Tatastha Shakti, which has some small control in a context that it finds itself in, but it cannot fundamentally change the context. And then you have the Bahiranga Shakti. You have the Bahiranga Shakti, which is the external energy, which is Maya. And what happens is that the Lord, being that 50% of the beach, is always the Lord. Now, this Tatastha Shakti, which is an extension of the Lord, an expansion of the Lord, is sometimes aware of its position of being an expansion of the Lord, but sometimes that tide comes in, that tide of ignorance of Maya, and covers you over. Maya, that which is not. And in that context, you then start to forget that you are just a tiny controller in a huge context that has been made by something far greater than you. And you start to think, actually, I'm pretty important, you know? Yeah, I'm something important. And what I want and what I need is very important, you know? And actually, I deserve more. And when you enjoy some success, you start to think, hey, I earned that. And when you start to inevitably start to experience some setbacks, you think, hey, I did not earn that and I do not deserve that. And in this way, Pork Tiag, you enjoy and you renounce, and sometimes you're happy, you're hankering, and sometimes you're lamenting, and you're going through this constant cycle. Why? Because you've forgotten your true constitutional position, and you're no longer situated in your true constitutional position, which is as part of that beach, that beautiful, warm beach where you are connected with the Lord. You are now under this illusion that I am part of this aquatic existence under the shoreline. But then what can happen? The beautiful benediction of being part of that beach is that sometimes the ocean can recede and you can again re-establish yourself as being part of the Lord's eternal energy. But you are still, unlike the Lord, prone to forgetting what your true constitutional position is. The Lord, however, is not. The Lord, however, is not. He is fundamentally different to us in that sense. And that leads us on to the second point, which is what would be mentioned. They cannot understand that his senses are transcendental. In the Brahma Samhita, the Lord's senses are described as omnipotent, i.e., with any sense, he can perform the activities of the other senses. One who has limited senses cannot believe that the Lord can eat by his transcendental power of hearing and can perform the act of sex life simply by seeing. The controlled living entities cannot even dream of such sense activities in his conditional life. The Lord can eat through hearing. What does that mean? That means that you can offer prayers. Please, Lord, accept this prasadam. And by hearing your prayers, he will enjoy your prasadam. The Lord can impregnate. He can have sex. Sex means to impregnate, to create progeny by his glance. There is a verse in Bhagavad Gita. There is a verse in Bhagavad Gita. What is that verse? I think it's 720. 720. Is it 725? Nope. There is a verse, and it says that the Lord, simply by glancing over the material nature, anyway, it will come back to me. There is one verse, something you're near. But the point is, well, we can talk about the Lord's senses and how the senses are absolute. Every morning in every temple across the whole planet that has been established or is part of ISKCON, this verse is chanted. Anangani yasya sakalendriya vritti manti pasyanti panti kalayanti cheram jaganti. Well, actually, not in that verse. People will probably recognize in this verse, Govindam Adi Purusham Tama Aham Bhajami Govindam. So in that Anangi Yasya Sakalendriya Vritti Manti, this verse, which is Brahma Samhita, 5th chapter, 32nd verse, that first line, Anangani Yasya Sakalendriya Vritti Manti, means each of the limbs of the transcendental figure of Krishna possesses full-fledged functions of all the organs. So the Lord can taste with his ears, the Lord can impregnate with his eyes, the Lord can touch with his sense of smell, the Lord can, see with his tongue. He is Purna, beginning of Sri Upanishad. Purnam, Om Purnam Adam Idam Purna Om Purnam, right? The Lord is full and complete in every respect. He doesn't need to distinguish between his sense of touch, his sense of sight, his sense of smell, because everything is complete. The Lord can sleep, and from his sweat and from his pore, a whole universe filled with the 25 different items of Sankhya philosophy, in fact 26, including the jiva, will be included within it. All the physical, earth, water, fire, air, ether, all the subtle mind, intelligence, false ego, all these senses and the objects of the senses and the living entities will be present simply through the pore of the Lord, through his sweat. So even the Lord's sweat, any byproduct from him, is also complete. The way the Lord's activities need to be looked at and the way that our activities need to be looked at are therefore fundamentally different. Because we cannot say the same. We cannot taste with our ears. We cannot see through our nose. We cannot hear through our eyes. Our senses do not operate in the same way. But then the question becomes, well, how do we know that it is the Lord? Right? How do we know that these activities are the Lord activities and not just the activities of some pretender? That's what the question becomes. Okay, you say that the Lord can do this. We can accept that at face value. This is all a very, very interesting philosophical pursuit. But how do we know when this Krishna that you're talking about, how do we know that this is Krishna and this is not just some pretender trying to obscure the true activities of the Lord? Well, we mentioned before that by reading the Bhagavatam, the taste is in the pudding. If you read and study the Bhagavatam, if you read and interact with the holy name, if you follow the process that is put in, and you do not feel that axiomatic, that self-evident spiritual development, that closeness with the Lord, then fine, disregard it. Krishna even says at the end of the Bhagavad Gita, I've told you this, it's up to you what you want to do with it. Nobody is forcing you. But chances are, if you do it sincerely, as the Lord has said, you will start to see that this is the detailed account about the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But it is not to be taken for granted. It's not an intellectual pursuit. In Bhagavad Gita, 1855, there's that famous verse, Bhaktyamam abhichananti yavanyaschasmi tatvataha tatao mam tatvato gnatva vishate tat anantaram. One can understand me as I am, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, only by devotional service. And when one is in full consciousness of me by such devotion, he can enter into the kingdom of God. What does it mean to enter the kingdom of God? You know who the Lord is. You can see him clearly face to face. But naham prakasha sarvasya yoga maya samamvritaha muroyam abhijanati lokomam ajam avyayam. Abhijanati, I've just thought of that now. One can know. And then na abhijanati, one will not know. So the Lord is saying in the 7th chapter, na abhijanati. I can never be known by the foolish and unintelligent, because I am covered by my internal potency. And therefore, they do not know that I am unborn and infallible. Right? So Srila Prabhupada even mentioned in the purport, it may be argued that since Krishna was visible to everyone when he was present on this earth, how can it be said that he is not manifest to everyone? But actually, he was not manifest to everyone. When Krishna was present, there were only a few people who could understand him to be the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Right? So what to speak of seeing the Lord through the eyes of Shastra, Shastra Chakshus, having the eyes of Shastra through the scriptures. Even when the Lord is physically present, even when the Lord is physically present, not everyone can recognize the Lord for who he is. Why? Because they are covered. Prabhupada here says they are covered by their internal energy. Now, this becomes very confusing because I've just said, well, it's the external energy. What do you mean by the internal energy? Krishna, Arjuna, you're trying to throw us off. You're taking us on a wild goose chase. No. Actually, internal, marginal, and external, all of them are ultimately expansion of the Lord's energy himself. What we perceive as Maya is still part of Krishna's energy. That's what Srila Prabhupada means here. But Bhaktivinoda Thakur and actually Srila Prabhupada confirmed this, that the Lord's energy, I've said 3, is actually divided into 5. The Lord himself is divided into 3, which is the Sandhani, Samvit, and Ladani Shaktis. But there is also the Jiva Shakti and the Maya Shakti. And the Maya Shakti I even mentioned has a 2-part subdivision of Yoga Maya and Mahamaya. But the way that we can understand it is that the Lord himself is comprised of the Samvit, Sandhani, Samvit, and Ladani Shakti. He also has a separate Shakti known as Jiva Shakti. And he also has a separate Shakti known as Maya Shakti. That Maya Shakti we can call the Bahiranga, or external energy. That Jiva Shakti we can call the Tatashta Shakti, that marginal energy where the ocean is covering, it's being sometimes covering and sometimes revealing. And the beach, which is always kept intact, which is always sunny and pristine and warm and inviting, and is always constant, that is the Lord. And that is divided into the Sandhani, Samvit, and Ladani Shakti. And, that is the beauty of this Srimad Bhagavatam, because you can go into an infinite detail as to the nature of this world that you will not find in any other scripture, in any other writing. Will you find a philosophical treatise which is as coherent and cogent as this? And in fact, many classes can be given on the Sandhani, Samvit, and Ladani Shakti. The Sandhani Shakti is the Lord's first expansion, Balaram. He gives the form to everything. From Balaram, the Sandhani Shakti, I'll just give you a brief insight into this. I don't want to take us off at a tangent, but we will. Sandhani Shakti, when Krishna lives in Goloka Vrindavan, the palaces, his paraphernalia, his cloth, everything there is still made up of energy. And that energy is his expansion of his first expansion, which is the Sandhani Shakti, which is Sri Balaram. The forum for the Lord to do anything, the thing that gives form and a forum, is given by Balaram. Balaram is also known as the Adi Guru, the foremost guru, the foremost teacher of how to understand the Supreme Lord. So from this Sandhani Shakti, which is represented by Balaram, and Nityananda Prabhu, comes the Guru within the heart. Because the Guru is also performing an important function. Just in the way that Balaram is giving the flutes, Balaram is also giving the knowledge by which Krishna can enjoy not just his flute, but the devotees will come to Krishna to listen to that flute. So Balaram is setting the stage, he's creating the forum, and he's creating the personalities who are also going to be part of that forum. He's bringing them there to create the form. That is the Sandhani Shakti, which is part of the Lord. Then you have the Samvit, the cognitive, the one who is experiencing, the supreme enjoyer. That's the Samvit. And that is Sri Krishna himself. His ability to perceive and interact and engage. That is the Samvit Shakti. And then you have the Ladani Shakti, which is the pleasure-giving potency. We've talked about the Shakti and the Shaktiman. You have the person who is enjoying, which is Krishna. But then you have the activity of enjoyment itself, that pleasure itself, which is Srimati Radharani. So that is the core of Krishna's heart. So this internal potency, this beach, has three separate categorizations, right? This beach, this antaranga, this internal energy that makes up the Lord, is actually divided into these three: Krishna, Balaram, Radharani. Ram, Lakshman, Sita Devi, right? You have Narayan, Sankarshan, Lakshmi. This triumvirate is required to fully understand the Lord, the Lord's energy, and the Lord's activity as it is. Then the Jiva Shakti is this Tatashta Shakti, this marginal, the ones who are sometimes being drawn in by the Sandhani Shakti, the Guru, to be part of the beach and the activity of the Lord, and are sometimes being covered by the Maya Shakti, this Bahiranga, this external energy. But ultimately, even the ocean, right? Even the external ocean, which we are calling external energy, is ultimately coming from the Lord himself. So in one sense it's external, but in another sense it is still part of the Lord. It's just a question of our consciousness. I hope that makes sense, and I hope if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. So then how then to understand, how to come out of this fog and understand the Lord as he is? Well, Krishna makes it very clear. There is a theme of how to understand. And if we do one search in the Bhagavad Gita, how to get this full understanding of Krishna, time and again the theme is you have to become his dear friend. Bhagavad Gita 1864, Bhagavad Gita 1865, Bhagavad Gita 10.1, Bhagavad Gita 9.29, Bhagavad Gita 12:13-14, this theme of becoming the Lord's dear friend. The Lord is saying, I'm explaining this to you, Arjun, oh Arjun, because you are my dear friend. You have to become the Lord's dear friend. You want to have the full understanding of who the Lord is, you have to become the Lord's dear friend. And what does it mean to become the Lord's dear friend? It means to render devotional service unto him. In the verse Bhagavad Gita 9:29, the Lord clearly states that only by rendering devotional service unto me, Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu Smaranam, only by rendering devotional service will you become my dear friend, or will you understand me as I am. I'm actually just looking for that verse now, because that has also just skipped my mind. Where has it gone? I had it here with me. Anyway. So you must become the Lord's dear friend by rendering service to him. I found that other verse actually. So to recap, then we understand that this, and I'll finish off this particular verse. To recap, we understand that there are three distinct points within this purport that we've touched upon. We'll just finish off this. We finish off this verse before I do the summary. So where have we got to? The Brahma Samhita, the Lord's senses are described as omnipotent, i.e. with any sense he can perform the activities of the other senses. One who has limited senses cannot believe that the Lord can eat by his transcendental power of hearing and can perform the act of sense life simply by seeing. The controlled living entity cannot even dream of such sense activities in his conditional life. And the verse that I was actually looking for is this verse: Mama yonir mahad brahma tasmin garbham tadam yaham sambhava sarvabhutanam tato bhavati bharata. And this is 14th chapter, 3rd verse. And Krishna is saying the total material substance called Brahman is the source of birth. And it is that Brahman that I impregnate, making possible the births of all living entities, O son of Bharata. So simply by glancing on this material nature, the Lord is impregnating. He is creating through his eyes, simply by seeing, he is creating life. Sex life just through seeing. So the controlled living entity cannot even dream of such sense activities in his conditional life. But simply by the activities of bhakti yoga, he can understand that the Lord and his activities are always transcendental. As the Lord says in Bhagavad Gita, bhaktyamam abhijanati yavanyas jasmi tatvata. One cannot know even a fraction of the activities of the Lord if he is not a pure devotee of the Lord. Let's bring up Bhagavad Gita 9:29. This is another very important verse. Samoham sarvabhuteshu nama dvesho stina priyaha ye bhajanti tu mam bhaktya mayi te teshu chapyaham. I envy no one, this is Krishna speaking, nor am I partial to anyone. I am equal to all. But whoever renders service unto me in devotion is a friend, is in me, and I am also a friend to him. So Krishna, 1865, 1864, he's saying that he will explain to you if you are his very dear friend. If you are his very dear, but then how to become a friend to him? Krishna is revealing in 929 to become a, Srila Prabhupada says in the purport of this verse, Srila Prabhupada says in this verse, the Lord claims that every living entity in whatever form is his son. And so he provides everyone with a generous supply for the necessity of life. However, for those who have become his friend, he can reveal his true personality. So to recap then, this is an interesting purport within a wonderful chapter, the Lord's activities outside of Vrindavan. And we've come across three kind of distinct points. The first point is that we cannot project our experience onto the Lord. And we should fall out of that. We should get out of that habit. And if anyone else says, oh, you're just saying this, but my experiences, we say to them, first of all, we shouldn't look at the world through our prism. And second of all, we don't know what we don't know. So for anyone else to say that they have the complete understanding, well, we have to say, no, you have limited experience. Before you can discredit the Srimad Bhagavatam, you must first approach the Srimad Bhagavatam in the proper way. But what is the proper way? Right? What is the proper way? We've just touched on that. That's the third. Not anyone can just read it as an intellectual pursuit. In order to fully understand the Bhagavatam, and to understand the Bhagavatam means to understand the Lord, we must become a dear friend to the Lord. That means to engage in Nava Anga Bhakti, Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu Smaranam, hearing, chanting, and remembering. We will then have the prerequisite understanding to be able to see the Lord within the Srimad Bhagavatam. And then the second point I made in between those 2 points was to understand the different energies of the Lord. The Lord is like the beach, the internal energy. That internal energy, and you should do some more reading on this, it's there in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Sandhani, Samvit, and Ladani Shakti. It's made up of three. Sandhani is Balaram, Samvit is Krishna, Ladani is Srimati Radharani. Sandhani is Lakshman, Samvit is Sri Ram, Ladani is Srimati Sita Thakurani. That's the internal energy. The marginal energy is the Jiva Shakti. And the external energy is Maya Shakti. But that Maya Shakti, the Jiva Shakti, is ultimately coming from the Lord himself. So thank you very much. I welcome any comments, corrections, questions. And Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Grantha Raj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Thank you so much for that great class. I mean, on a day like today, like Ekadashi, even your energy was very convincing and very passionate. It's unlike most of us, where sometimes the leadership gets up on us, but we could feel the nectar. And thank you so much, because you've really reminded us that about today's verse. It's quite powerful that we are really controlled by material nature, and only Krishna is independent. However much we try to advance in this material world, we can never be independent. And also how you emphasized that we keep with this culture of reading the Srimad Bhagavatam deeply, interacting with the holy names, and not just for intellectual knowledge, not just for the intellectual knowledge, but actually knowing this wisdom is actually beyond our intellect. Yeah. And we are really glad to so much clarity. Thank you so much for blessing us on such a beautiful day on this Mohini Akadashi. We are really inspired and so grateful. Thank you. For me, I have no question, and just a comment, just that comment, like to open up to the assembled devotees. Any comments or questions? Hare Krishna. Thank you.
That was a beautiful synopsis. You should be giving the class next week, Prabhu.
Yeah, I think Indu Samataji was asking, could you please give that key point again? I think she did not.
So the first point, because I then reverse the order, so I'll quickly just go through three. The first point is we should realize Atmavan Manyate Jagat. We will always have a bias based on our limited experience. We ourselves cannot see anything completely because, first of all, there's four defects, but we have limited knowledge, right? And we have limited senses. So if we look at the Lord's activities and compare them with ours, well, if I did this, then this is what I must be thinking. That is not correct, right? If the Lord has 16,000 wives, and we think, well, if I had 16,000 wives, what would my thought process be? Therefore, this is my thought process. Therefore, that must be the Lord's thought process. What we must realize is, number one, we don't have full knowledge, right? We don't have full knowledge. And number two, so we don't have full experience. And number two, we may not have experience. Sorry, we don't know what we don't know, and we have a limited amount of knowledge. Right? We don't know what we don't know. We don't know whether it is possible to operate on a different platform. But we don't have the full knowledge. Now, to understand this about the Lord, right, we must become the Lord's friend. We must render devotional service. That's what Prabhupada is saying. Krishna says, I will reveal this knowledge to you completely. I will inundate, I will saturate your intelligence and your heart with this understanding of who I am and how my activities are peerless, but only if you become my friend and my devotee. Become my friend means to become my devotee, which means to render devotional service. So that's the first and third point. And then the second point, which is in between those, which I mentioned, is why is it that we are different from the Lord? Why is it the Lord can understand everything and do everything? Well, we are marginal energy. We can become covered by the external energy, but he is always the internal energy. He is never covered by this external energy. I hope that covers all 3 points. So if there's any questions on any of those, please, by all means, Mataji. No, I hope that answered your question.
Yes.
We'll go with yes. Any other questions?
Hitesh Prabhu, please.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. First of all, very nice class. Well, I have a comment. Well, you mentioned about we are never independent. We are always controlled either by Devi Shakti or Maya Shakti. And the purpose of our life is to get out of this Maya, being controlled by Maya Devi, and being controlled by Devi Shakti. So it so happened like it's our senses, like in today's verse, it's not only the gross senses, we even have the mind, we have the intellectual, we have even our ego. So, and what I have understood by the Shastra is like this material world is a perverted reflection of what happens in the spiritual world. So at the end of the day, even our ego will forget that this aham will focus about how to please the Lord, and how to get out of this what the verse says, supernatural force. We'll see that in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 7, verse 14. It says like this divine energy of mind, consisting of the three modes of material nature, is difficult to overcome. But those who have surrendered unto me can easily cross beyond it. Like Prabhu Krishna Arjuna Das has mentioned several verses about devotional service. There's one secret about being successful in this bhakti yoga is like to feel like, of course, to surrender to Lord Krishna, but another secret is like to feel to be a servant of our spiritual master. And if someone really feel to be the dog of a spiritual master, like that's, and being the dog of our spiritual master is to follow the Vani of our spiritual master. And everything, if Prabhupada says we have to follow the four regulative principle, this is step 0. We have much more principle to follow. So just following the Vani of Srila Prabhupada, however he says, it's like everything from waking up till sleep every day. This Bhakti Yoga, Srila Prabhupada has given all the secret in his books. Everything that he has to say are there in his books. Simple process. We just have to hold the dhoti of Srila Prabhupada and everything will be successful. And that's it.
Hare Krishna. Yes, very true. The key actually to become dear to Krishna, if we then take it another step forward, because only by becoming dear to Krishna will we understand Krishna. The key to becoming dear to someone important is to become dear to someone who is dear to that person, right? So if you want to approach a billionaire, be nice to the billionaire's son. If you want to understand the Supreme Lord, be a close friend, a genuine friend, not a wishy-washy, I have an agenda friend. Be a genuine friend to that person's son. So those person's son we have in our Srila Prabhupada and the sincere followers of Srila Prabhupada. So let us serve alongside the sincere followers of Srila Prabhupada to please Srila Prabhupada. And Krishna will automatically be pleased. We can do some, what can we do for the king, for the billionaire? But if we help the friend of the king in their mission, automatically the king is pleased. So thank you so much, Hitesh, for a lovely point. Love it. Wonderful. I feel like this is an unofficial ISKCON temple in Mauritius, right here, where you are sitting. That's beautiful. Thank you. I see this beautiful deity of Srila Prabhupada there also.
Yeah.
Hare Krishna. Wow. Beautiful.
Thank you. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Do we have anything else? Wow, I see love hearts coming from Bhakta Mugo Prabhu. That was amazing. So if that's all, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, ISKCON Eldoret ki jai, Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha, Kripa Sindhu Vacha, Patita Nam Pavanebhyo, Vaishnavebhyo Namo. ISKCON Samstapika Acharya Srila Prabhupada.
Prabhuji Jai.
Thank you all. I'll see you in 2 weeks' time.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much.
Krishna.
Hare Krishna.